The following is a summary of the Sicha of Shabbos Parshas Mishpatim, the 27th of Shvat, Shabbos Mevorchin Adar Rishon, Tov Shin Nun Beis. Everything that happens in the world is by Hashgacha Pratis. And there's a lesson and an instruction that we can learn from what's happening in the world, especially if it's something major, which is happening with the major countries in the world where you have the vast majority of Jews living in those places. And what happened on this Erev Shabbos Kodesh, this Friday, was a gathering of the leaders of these major nations. At the head, you had the two leaders of the greatest superpowers, and they made a decision that there was going to be a new era in terms of international relationships. It was going to be a new era of no more warring and of the limit of weaponry, and this would bring peace, it would bring unity, and it would bring international aid and help between countries. In fact, before this, on the previous Wednesday, there was a speech by the President of the United States in which he announced about the limitation of weapons of mass destruction, and instead using the money which is used to make them for agricultural causes, feeding people in the world. This received the backing of the House of Representatives, in which the law in America is made, Dina de Malchusa, Dina, the din of the country being the din. And so really we need to think deeply into this, about this announcement, both in terms of the place that the announcement was made, the time the announcement was made, and its connection with the Parshas Hashavua. So let's start off with the instruction and the learning, what we can learn from this. First of all, it's Lahavi Limois HaMashiach. All of this is happening because we're coming towards the Yemos HaMashiach. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya which says, V'chitzu charvosam li'itim, v'cha nisoisem lemazmeres, lo yisa goy el goy cherev, v'lo yilmadu oid melchama. This means that the swords will be turned into plowshares, and the spears into pruning hooks. No nation will war with another nation. They won't learn any more warring, but rather they will be peace. This is being achieved through Melech HaMashiach. As it says, V'shafat bein hagoyim, the Mashiach will judge between the nations, V'hoichiach la'amim rabim, as the Radak points out, that the shofet of which Yeshaya is talking is Melech HaMashiach. He will be the one to make peace between the nations. As it says, V'noharu elov kol hagoyim, that all the nations will stream to him and accept his dominion. So since in these days where there's been this announcement about the reduction of these weapons and an addition in supplying kalkala, food, agriculture to the world, which is the whole idea of v'chitesu charvosam li'itim, of turning the swords into plowshares, this is a siman borur. It's an absolute clear sign about the beginning of the fulfillment of this promise in Yeshaya with the Geula through Mashiach. And since we are in the Zeman Hashid, the Hechste Zeit, the highest time of this period of Mashiach's coming, Hinei zeh Melech HaMashiach ba, and we see already, therefore, the beginning of the actions of Melech HaMashiach on the nations of the world, through that which Hashem is placing in the hearts of kings to make announcements and decisions to reduce weaponry. And the reason why they are doing it in this particular time is because of the juxtaposition to the Geula through Mashiach. We can add over here that this is actually connected with the detail of where this announcement was made, in terms of the place that it was made and the time that it was made. This was made in the place of the United Nations building, which is in New York, which is the place where the Beis Rabbeinu Shebebavel is, the Beis HaMedrash of the Rebbe, Beis Chayenu, in which the Rebbe chose this place as to be the central place from which would go forth Torah and the Mayones of Chassidus to the entire world. In fact, when the Rebbe came to the Americas, he started with tremendous force the refining and elevating of the lower hemisphere, in which he would also draw the revelation of the giving of the Torah. And actually from there spread Torah, Yiddishkeit, and Chassidus in the entire world through the Shluchim, until it reached the far-flung corners of the world, including those who live amongst the nations of the world, speak their language, and externally conduct themselves like those places. And in addition, there was the spreading of the Torah and Chassidus between the nations of the world themselves through the encouraging of their keeping the 7 Noahide laws, which then is the fulfillment as Oz, Epoch, El Amin, Sofa Brura, all the nations turning to and believing in Hashem. So in the last time period, starting from Shnas Nisim Tavshin Nun, and the continuation in Tavshin Nun Aleph, Shnas Niflois Arenu, and Tavshin Nun Beis, Niflois Bakoil, this Pu'ula, this effect has reached the highest levels. In fact, the country which warred against Torah, Yiddishkeit, and Emunah, the country which arrested and placed in incarceration the Frierdiker Rebbe, and in which the Shluchim of the Rebbe continued their work with tremendous Mesidus Nefesh, very recently has completely changed and now currently allows the spreading of Yiddishkeit in a revealed way. The previous government fell, a new government has arisen which has announced Tzedek v'Yosher, that there will be righteousness, al Yesod ha'emunah, on the foundations of the faith in the creator of the world and the one who conducts the world, Hashem. On Erev Shabbos, there was a meeting between the Manhigim, the leaders of Russia and the United States, where they made this announcement of Chitusu, that the swords would be turned into plowshares, and the meeting took place in the city of the Rebbe, in New York. In fact, even the President of the United States came from Washington, the capital, to New York. And the reason why the UN was made in New York is because the Rebbe was there. All this is an extension of the tremendous effort in spreading Torah and Yiddishkeit, Tzedek v'Yosher, righteousness in the entire world, which is achieved through the Nasi Hador, who is the Mashiach of the Dor, and that is emphasized in the name of the Nasi Hador. Yosef, as it says, Yosef Hashem Shenis Yodoi, Hashem will stretch out his hand again to gather the Yidden, and Yitzchak, Oz Yimalis Chayk Pinu, then our mouths will be full of laughter in the Geula. And therefore, in these days, the world is becoming ready to receive the beginning of the action of Melech HaMashiach, who, v'shafat bein hagoyim, will judge between the nations. And it's interesting to note that the building of the United Nations was built around the time that the Frierdiker Rebbe came to New York in the 1950s. And in other words, the Rebbe came in the 1940s, but the building actually took place in 1950, 1951. And on the wall of the building of the United Nations is inscribed this verse, that the sword will be turned into plowshares. Let's now have a look at the time that this announcement was made. This was a very auspicious time. Firstly, because of the day. It was made on Friday, which is the eve and the preparation of the day of Shabbos, which Shabbos is a foretaste of the day in which will be the millennia of Mashiach, in which all mazikin, all damages will cease from the world. And since we always add on to Shabbos from the Friday, like a ze'ev, a wolf who tears and grabs before and afterwards, similarly over here on Friday, we are already adding on to the time of Shabbos by reaching a situation of Shabbos already when we are annulling any mazikin, any damages in the world. The date of the month is also auspicious. It's the 26th day of Shvat. 26 is the gematria of the name Havaya, which is the idea that le'osid lavoi, in time to come, the hishavus, the creation of the world, through the name Havaya, will be recognized throughout the entire creation. As it says, v'nigla kavod Hashem, that the glory of Hashem will be revealed. And then, lo yoreov lo yashchisa, there will be no room for damages. And when we join them both together, the 26th day of the month, which is on Friday, the day on which man was created, therefore man fulfills the purpose of creation. And this is all connected with the Rebbe, because this is the last Friday of the month of Shvat, the 11th month, in which the 10th day of that month was the Yom Hilula, Yud Shvat, the passing of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And on Yud Aleph Shvat, the 11th of Shvat, was the continuation and the renewal of his Nesius with greater strength and vitality, until the end of the Avodah of this generation, which is the first generation of Geula, a 42-year period corresponding to the 42 journeys in the wilderness, and now we're standing ready for the Geula. So even in the time of this announcement is emphasized its connection with the Nasi of the Dor, who is the Mashiach of the Dor, through whose actions comes v'chitasu, the idea of turning the swords into plowshares. This is all connected with Parshas Mishpatim. Rashi says, ve'ele adds on to what was previously said. Just like the previous mitzvahs were said at Sinai, so too these were said at Sinai. And it has to be put lifneihem, before Jewish courts and not non-Jewish courts. The content of the parsha, which are laws between man and fellow man, these are laws which are understood in human intellect. In fact, had the Torah not been given, we would have learned things from the creation, like tznius from a cat. And this seichel, this intellect, is understood by all nations of the world. That's why the Torah actually says, ve'ele, af elu misinai, to tell us that even mishpatim, which can be understood in human intellect, should be performed out of an obligation because it's a tzivui, a command of Hashem. And therefore, the dinim have to be judged in a Jewish court and not in a non-Jewish court, although they judge through their intellect, but nevertheless, a Jewish court does so because it comes from Sinai. So, ve'ele hamishpatim, af elu misinai, we can say the following, that even the mind of the intellect has to be and is caused by Sinai. In fact, had these mitzvahs not been given at Sinai, then human intellect would not obligate them. What we're saying here is that the human understanding and intellect is in fact a result of the fact that the will of Hashem clothed itself in the wisdom of the Torah, and since the Torah is the architect plans of the world, from which the world was created, therefore the world and its understanding and its seichel came through the Torah. And this is moisif al horishonim, meaning that the mishpatim which were given at Sinai are drawn into human intellect. So the novelty of Matan Torah was the bittul hagzera, the annulment of the decree that the upper worlds should not descend to the lower and the lower should not ascend to the higher worlds. When Torah was given, what happened is that even human intellect understood and synced together with Sinai, with the will of Hashem. And that is the case also in terms of the performance of the 7 Noachide laws, the Sheva Mitzvah Shel Bnei Noach, which even though human intellect understands them, nevertheless, they also need to be kept because Hashem commanded them in the Torah. In other words, they shouldn't be done out of pure understanding of the human intellect, and one who does fulfill them in that way without connecting them to Hashem is not from the Chasidei Umes Ha'olam or Mechachameihem. And the tachlis of all of this is to reach the Yemos HaMashiach, which then, Umala Haaretz Deas Hashem, the whole world will be filled with the day of Hashem, and it will permeate also the Seichel Adam, the intellect of a person. And that is hinted to at the end of the parasha, where it says, Vayiru es Elokei Yisrael, that they saw the God of Israel, V'sachas raglov k'maaseh livnas hasapir, Vayechazu es Elokim, Vayochlu Vayishtu. They saw Elokim and they ate and they drank. In other words, the seeing of Elokus at Sinai permeated their intellect to the extent that it was like food, which is ingested, digested, and becomes flesh and blood. And this is through the learning of Pnimius HaTorah, Torah's Chabad, inclusive of its translation into the 70 languages of the world. Livnas Sapir, the word Livnas is like the word Levena, meaning a brick. The 70 languages of the world being like bricks of letters put together, for those who don't yet understand Lashon HaKodesh or Yiddish, which is an intermediary language. And all of this is a preparation of the promise that all the nations of the world will serve Hashem together. So from all this we can understand the import of this announcement on Erev Shabbos Kodesh Mishpatim. V'chitzu is understood in human intellect. We understand there needs to be righteousness and there needs to be peace in the world. And we understand in Seichel that Churban, destruction, is the opposite of Yishuvoi Shalolam, of inhabiting the world peacefully. Nevertheless, right throughout the generations, there has been war and destruction. It goes against the grain of human intellect. So therefore, we must say, why, Davka now, is there this announcement that there will be a cessation of the wars in the world, and that we're starting a new era of righteousness and peace and unity? That's not coming just because of Seichel, because that Seichel was lacking throughout the generations. but it's coming because of the proximity to the fulfillment of the promise of a chitzu, that the swords will be turning to plowshares. In other words, because of the announcement of the Torah. What we're saying is that this announcement of the leaders of the nations is a result of the decision and the announcement of Malkei Rabbanon, of the rabbis, who have announced that Hinei Zeh Melech HaMashiach Ba, the Mashiach is coming. Starting from the ruling of the Rebbe, who said that we have already filled and finished all the actions that we need to do in Golus, and also the Piskei Dinim, the rulings of Rabbonim, Moirei Heira, of Rabbonim, who have said that Mashiach has to come. And in other words, that Sinai has permeated also the parameters of the world, so much so that from the announcement of the Rebbe and the Rabbonim, the leaders of the free world are also announcing in their House of Representatives about this peace initiative. And this comes to full revelation on Shabbos, which is the Aliyah, the elevation of the day of Friday, on which we read the Parsha of Mishpatim, in which we see clearly that the announcement of the nations is a direct result of the Psak Din in Torah about the coming of Mashiach. And we can add over here that there is in Parshas Mishpatim itself a reference to the time of Golus, the end of Golus and the beginning of Geula. First of all, we have the continuity of all the parshas. Parshas Mishpatim comes immediately after Parshas Yisro. In the end of Parshas Yisro, we have the dinim of the Mizbeach, the altar. And we know that right next to the altar was the Sanhedrin. And that is the fulfillment of Ashiva Sheftayach, the renewal of the Sanhedrin. It's also the Shir Chumash of Erev Shabbos Kodesh, where it says, "Lahaviach el amokem asher achinosi," I'll bring you to the place which I have prepared, which is a reference to the Beis Hamikdash. And from the Parsha of Mishpatim, we go to the Parsha of Truma, where it says, "Va'asu li Mikdash," which is a reference to the building of the third Beis Hamikdash. And in between the Parsha of Yisro and the Parsha of Truma, we have the Parsha of Mishpatim, which is the idea that the inyanim of Geula have permeated also the seichel, the intellect of people, so much so that the nations of the world are now announcing it. And in the Parsha of Mishpatim itself, you have also rolled out the whole Seder HaNazikin, the laws of damages. Nazikin in general refers to the time of Golus. And in fact, there are three bavos, three sections in Nazikin, Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Basra, and they correspond to the three Goluyos of Golus Mitzrayim, Golus Bavel, and Golus Edom. And we start off with the Daled Bavos, Nazikin, the four types of Nazikin in Bava Kama, the Meriva, the arguments in Bava Metzia, and in Bava Basra we end with Hashutfin, who the partners who wish to make a mechitza in between them, and the end of Baba Basra says that one who wishes to become wise should engage in the laws of dinim mamanis, of the monetary laws in the Torah, which is the idea of bringing Sinai into the monetary laws in order to take away the nazikin which are in Golus. Lahoisif, to add, in Maseches Baba Basra, there is a whole sugya, an entire discussion about Geula, in Daf Ayin Daled Amud Beis, where it says, "Osir HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'aseh suda l'tzadikim mibesara shel Levyosen," that Hashem will make in time of the future a meal for the righteous from the meat of the Levyosen, and many other promises and future occurrences in the times of Mashiach coming, and also in Daf Kuf Chav Beis Amud Aleph, there is a discussion there about the division of Eretz Yisrael, Asid Lavi. So we see in Bava Basra itself a tremendous reference to the Geula. according to everything which we've just said, there is an astonishing lacking of understanding that Hayitochen, after all of this, Bnei Yisrael are still in Golus, Ad Mosai. Hayitochen, that after all the Simonim, and after the announcements of the nations of the world that there will be a reduction in weaponry, we're still in Chutz La'aretz. We should be in Eretz Yisrael. We should be in the Beis HaMikdash. We should be eating the Suda of Livyasan. And furthermore, there has not yet been received the information, the command, and the empowerment of making the Beis HaMikdash. That yet has not been received. And therefore we can understand how important and necessary is it for us to engage in things that literally speeden up and bring the Geula b'poel mamash. First of all, those things which are mentioned in Mishpatim. Dinim between man and one's fellow man, out of peace, Tzion b'mishpat tzipade. Tzedakah and Gemilas Chasadim, as it says in the Sedra in Kesef Talva, which tzedakah brings closer the Geula. And this actually, tonight, there's a Malava Malka for the Gemach, for the Gemilas Chesed, and it's Kedai that the one who runs the Gemach should come up and announce about the Malava Malka, Barov Am Hadras Melech, with many participants, and the main thing is should bring the reward of Gemilas Chesed, that we should be able to sit at the Malava Malka together with the Rebbe, Nasi Dereinu, Mashiach Tzidkeinu, Bereishenu, in Eretz HaKodesh in Yerushalayim. And in the words of Bava Basra, how it opens, Hashutfin Sharotzu. We're talking about two partners who want the good of each other. And through that, they build the Koisel, which is Gozis, hewn, a reference to the Beis HaMikdash. And Truma, Va'osuli Mikdash, starting from the inner Mikdash of each one of us, making of our homes and houses a house of Torah Tefillah and Gemilas Chasadim, and broadening and expanding shuls and Bate Midrashes. And there's a special empowerment in these days. We're coming from the day of the 25th of Shvat, Koi, Kaf Hei, Koi Savarchu, which is Birchas Koyanim, which is Ba'ava with great love. We're starting with Harenim and Kabel, but this is a bracha which includes all the brachas, including the bracha of the Gula. Then Yom Chavav, the 26th of Shvat, which is the gematria of the name Havaya, the Shem HaMefoirish, which is a preparation for mentioning the Shem HaMefoirish in the Beis HaMikdash, and as a preparation for that, through the Mamlechas Koyanim of Yidden, understanding Shavisi Hashem Lenegdi Samit, that brings quicker the saying of the Shem HaMefoirish in the Beis HaMikdash. The 27th day of the month, Shemen Zayis Zoch, Chof Zayin or Zayin Chof, which is the menorah of 7 branches, all the branches of the souls of Yidden. The 28th day, and Tosfos Koyach, an additional Kof Ches Koyach to do all this. And then we have Erev Rosh Chodesh, which there is a Chidush HaLevana, a new moon, which that refers to the Yidden and Geula, especially it being on a Tuesday, a day which is doubly good, and the month of Adar, whose mazel is strong, and Mismach Geula Le Geula, the juxtaposition of one Geula to the next, in a way that in fact the Geula will come even before Purim. And even though Mismach Geula Le Geula, the juxtaposition of the Geulas, usually refers to the second Adar, Yesh Loima, we can say that it also has a reference to the first Adar. As the Mishnah says, Ein bein Adar Rishon L'Sheni Ela Kriyas HaMegillah Umatanas Levyonim, there's no difference between the first Adar and the second Adar except the reading of the Megillah and the giving of gifts to the poor, which implies that in every other aspect they are equal. And since the first Adar is called Adar Rishon, it implies that it is actually the Rishon, the first in Maila, in level, and that of course is connected with Zayin Adar, the 7th of Adar, which is the day which Moshe Rabbeinu was born, and of course that was the Bittul, the annulment of the decree of Haman. So the main thing is, even though we've already announced today by Shabbos Mevorchim that it's Adar Rishon, but it's possible for Mashiach to come, Sanhedrin will be reconvened, they will change that it won't be a leap year, but there'll only be one Adar, and it could be that we can go straight from this Geula to the Geula of Nisan. V'yehi rotzain, that the Geula should come take it from Miyad Mamish. And certainly we don't need to wait until the month of Nisan, and not until the month of this Adar Sheni. But the Geula can come right now at the end of Chodesh Shvat, on the 27th of Shvat, especially on Shabbos after Chatzos, Mincha, a time which is connected with the Geula. Kain Tihya Lonu Miyad, with all the Pirushim of the word Miyad. Mem Moshe, Yud Yisrael, the Baal Shem Tov, and David Malka Mashiach. And Biprotius Yosef, in more detail, Benegeya to our generation, the Rosh Tevas of Miyad are a remez, a hint, to the 3 time periods of the Rebbe, and in a Seder which is closest to us, Mem Moshiach, whose name is Menachem, Yud Yosef Yitzchak, and Dalet Doiv Ber, which is the second name of the Rebbe Rashab, including also all the Pirushim of the word Mamash, and most importantly, Mamash Kipshute, literally, the Mashiach should come, Mamash, Mamash, Mamash.